to be looking at our mask tutorial. This is a project I thought might be kind of fun for you guys. You know, it's something obviously we all need. I've made about 1 million of them this summer, but I thought this will give you a little practice sewing and also be able to help you maybe, you know, just give you the opportunity to go and buy some fabric and make something to wear. So why are we doing a mask? I wanted to just talk a little bit about some key skill takeaways of this project. First of all, for some of you guys, you're really sewing for the first time. So this is a really great, simple project. Doesn't take too long, and it'll give you opportunity to practice your sewing your seams, placing your fabrics in the right order, doing a little difference between basting and sewing a seam. We'll also be looking at grading seam allowances. I'll talk a little bit more about that as we get there. You'll practice some pressing skills. So just generally pressing your seams, pressing seams open, pressing seam allowance down, things like that. There's a very little bit of hand sewing in this project, so you'll have the opportunity to get your needle and thread out. We're going to be sewing a binding to finish the two ends. And kind of we'll talk a little bit about sewing elastic and inserting methods for elastic in casings. So let's get started. So what are the supplies we need? For this project, you are going to need to go out and purchase some 100% cotton fabric. You should be able to purchase, it's probably a 1/4 yard, I'd say, of fabric. And that actually, I think will get you, it definitely will get you more than one mask, depending on how wide it is. But that's what we need to get started with this project. So think about, you might have some fabric around the house. I know I do. I've been making masks for all my friends, and I've never bought fabric because I have so much. So look and see what you have. Maybe you already have something. Also, don't discount, you know, if you have an old shirt or something that you want to maybe repurpose, this is a perfect spot. It's a very little bit of fabric. So that's an idea. I also have used some fabric that I hand dyed with natural dyes. So whatever fabric you use, I would highly recommend that you pre-wash this fabric. Most fabric has sizing on it, and so it stays nice and crisp in the store. But since we're putting this right up against our face, I think it really is a good idea to pre-wash your fabric. So pre-wash it, and you'll see when it comes out, it will be kind of, you know, wrinkled and stuff. So first thing you want to do before we cut anything out is press our fabric. So then that's going to be the 100% cotton fabric. And then the items on the right are going to be in your design kit that hopefully we've picked up at this point. I'm doing this, you know, during the summer, so, but that's the plan. I have pieces of 7.5-inch silk fabric for each one of you, and a metal nose piece that I bought, and then 2 pieces of elastic, so you don't need to worry about those items. They will be supplied. The silk fabric I think is kind of interesting. I read an article about how great silk was as a filter, so that's what I've been using, and I've been really pleased with the masks. I did kind of the test where you try to blow a candle out, and you really can't when you're wearing this, so I felt like that was a good idea. So those are the supplies that you need to get going. So get your fabrics. You'll see on the right here, there's the piece of silk that you should have, the nose piece, the 2 pieces of elastic, and then those are on the right. I just used cutout muslin for this because I realized I made a tutorial with pattern fabric and it was hard to see. So I did another one so you could, I think it's easier for you to see in this instance. So you can see my 2 pieces of muslin. I ripped, since it's 100% cotton, we really can, you can clip and then rip the fabric, and it'll rip right along the grain, you know. So cut them out 7.5 inches square. You need 2 of those, and then you need another piece, 2 pieces that are 2 inches by 5 inches. So again, after you do that, you know, if it's not quite square because the fabric is torqued, kind of try to, you know, twist it into position that it's nice and square, and press it. Okay, so let's get going. So in this first picture on the left, you can see I have my fabrics. I have the two pieces of muslin. I have them right sides together. Now this will be a lot easier if you have a printed fabric because muslin really doesn't have a right and wrong side. But in printed fabric, you will have a right and wrong side. So make sure you have your two right sides of your print together, and then on top, you're going to take your piece of silk, and your silk might be white. I think that's probably what I'm going to include in the kits. So, but it's easier to see the navy, I thought. So now you're going to pin all three of those together, matching them up at the top. You can see I've put two pins just to hold it all together. And then I did a straight seam right across the top using a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Once that's done, make sure your iron is on and ready to go. Take your pins out and just press the stitching. We're not opening up at this point or doing anything like that. We're just going to press the stitching out. And this is a really good habit to get into because that kind of relaxes all the stitching and it makes it smooth so that when you do, in fact, turn it later, in a minute here, where you'll see that it's just a lot smoother. So it's a really good working habit to get into. Now on the right, this is where I talked a little bit about grading seam allowance before. This is grading. So what you want to do is, in this case, I just took one part of the seam allowance on the muslin and the seam allowance on the silk, and I trimmed it down. And you can actually see over here, this is the trim pieces. So you can see I just kind of trimmed it down 1/4 inch. And what that does, and it's not, you can see it's not perfect, but it's okay. It's not, nobody's going to see it. But what it does is that when we turn this and we press it, it's going to and we call it grading because it grades the seam allowance. So all your ends aren't in one spot creating bulk. So we're lessening bulk, and that's really important in sewing. So go ahead and do that. Now, this next part, now we're going to open up this seam. So you can see I have opened it up and the seam allowance is towards the silk side. So press it like that and then flip it over and then press the other side too. So you just make sure your seam allowance is nice and open and everything's pressed and clean.